Hello, everybody. It is Wednesday in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My name is Adam Bittner, assistant sports editor for multimedia at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, back with Seth Engle, our Post-Gazette and Daily Collegian Penn State insider for our weekly Penn State football and more podcast. Seth, not a ton of news to digest this week on a local level, but a lot going on around the country. So we're going to talk about some big transfer portal pickups for Penn State, and then we're going to get into some of those national storylines and how they might impact the Nittany Lions. How are you?
I'm doing really well. Yeah, it's we're in the midst of the offseason now. Penn State finally making some moves in the portal. Obviously some big national news there with Nick Saban retiring, Kalen DeBoer now in. So looking forward to breaking that all down with you.
Yeah, I think last week we talked about Julian Fleming, Nolan Rucci, basically coming back to Penn State. They were guys that were real hot on Penn State in the recruiting process, end up going to other programs out of state, but now they are back in Pennsylvania with Penn State. So those were big pickups. We also mentioned that we thought A.J. Harris had been crystal balled to Penn State. Mm-hmm. That commitment comes through this week. Former five-star, went to Georgia, still has a lot of years left. What are your thoughts on Penn State, finishing off that pickup, given the way they looked in the Peach Bowl and how the defensive secondary was looking a little bit soft for next season?
Yeah, I think we spent, a majority of the last episode talking about how Penn State had to go out and not just get one corner, but get two. So they get A.J. Harris, which is a huge pickup, but then they're able to go out and get Jalen Kimber, another guy with years of SEC cornerback experience. So Penn State does get the two of them. So I think that's a big deal, the fact that it wasn't just one. But, I mean, A.J. Harris is one of the most prolific transfers in the entire country, not just in the secondary. But, this guy is I think it says something when you burn your red shirt at Georgia. That was a loaded secondary this past year, maybe the best cornerback room in the entire country. And he was still able to play 7 games. Now, maybe that's because, Georgia was blowing teams out. But at the same time, I mean, it's like 7 games is 7 games. And we've seen it's hard for freshmen to burn their red shirts. Like it says something about what they're able to do in practice.
So how do you look at this secondary group now? They've got some decent internal options, but obviously they looked a little bit soft in the Peach Bowl. You add A.J. Harris with some youth and upside to the mix, and then you mentioned Jalen Kimber. He brings experience. Do you think that was the total package that they needed to kind of go into next season with expectations that maybe you're not going to be as good as when you have Kalen King and Johnny Dixon right off the bat, but that you have upside and some potential to grow into being a pretty solid secondary once again with Tom Allen in his first year as defensive coordinator?
Yeah, I think it's huge. And I think that, Cam Miller still has potential to be a good cornerback. He did struggle in the Peach Bowl, as did the two freshmen, Zion Tracy and Elliott Washington. But I think, with another year to maybe play more, but then also, kind of still learn the ropes with some other, guys ahead of them for another season, I think that could be, useful. I think that could be good for all 3 of those guys. And I do think playing time is still going to increase. I just think this is, a win-win for all the for the whole secondary.
How do you think that group ends up shaking out? I guess maybe 1 through 3, and who wins out in those competitions? Obviously, you still have to get them on campus. We've learned from the Dante Cephas experiment that sometimes these transfer portal additions are not sure things, and that things can go sideways as well. But just as we sit here today, Seth, if you had to pick a 1, 2, 3 from the group that they have and the group that they've picked up, how would you stack them up?
Well, I do think A.J. Harris is going to compete for a starting spot. I don't know, maybe Kimber also earns that starting role as well, just based on the fact that this is a guy who's, he's played like 5 years already. This is a guy, I know James Franklin doesn't like to make promises, but this was a guy who, already had a pretty solid role at Florida, had a couple of years at Georgia as well. Like, he's played college football. So I do think that he probably, if he doesn't earn a starting spot, he earns starting minutes. And I do think Cam Miller is right there with the rest of the 3, despite the fact that he struggled. Like, he knows the program. He's been there. He's worked his butt off over the past couple of years, and he was that number one corner in the Peach Bowl. And then I would kind of have the freshman trail a little behind that group of three. But, right now, I don't know. It's hard to say. It is hard to say, but I think any of the three of them could earn a starting role. And if one of them maybe moves to nickel, maybe all three do.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I don't think you bring some of those guys in from the portal unless you intend to give them every chance to start, right? And you do have that youth and inexperience, so you give yourself a chance to build some depth if you let some of those other guys play. But curious to see how those competitions play out. I wouldn't be surprised if there were surprises right between now and then, because there were certainly surprises in terms of what they brought in last season. You got to get them in the system and then figure things out. So I think spring ball is going to be very interesting in that regard. The other portal addition, possibly noteworthy, Logan Cunningham. I think he was going to Marietta D3, but he played with Quentin Martin, one of the big names they pulled in this year's recruiting class at Bell Vernon here in Western PA. He joins. He's a receiver. Maybe not the receiver I think people may have been wanting to see the Penn State pick up in the transfer portal. I think they were probably shooting a little higher than a D3 type of guy, but he's got some ties to the program nonetheless. Do you see him as having a chance to be more than kind of a depth option in this offense?
Yeah, no, not much there. I mean, there's obviously a chance, once he comes in and gets some work in. I think it is good, to kind of have those ties with Martin and, the Pennsylvania area. But I don't see him making too much of an impact. Same goes for Jordan Meyer, who is, the other transfer addition from Wisconsin. It's him and Rucci kind of coming over. I think Meyer's also another in-state guy. These are guys who are going to have to work. It's hard to transfer over to any program. It's another to transfer over when you weren't too highly touted. It's not like these guys were necessarily, recruited too heavily out of high school. You really have to get to know the coaching staff and get to know kind of the guys around you and make an early impact. And I do think that enrolling now rather than enrolling in, let's say, June, like Dante Cephas did, I do think that, gives you a bit of a head start. And I think that's important.
Seth, the other big personnel move this week was at special teams coordinator. Stacey Collins out, goes to Boise State. Justin Lustig comes in from Vanderbilt. Does that move the needle for you at all in terms of Penn State's moving forward on that side of the ball?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a bit of an upgrade. Props to Stacey Collins for what he did at Penn State over the past couple of years. His ties to the West Coast and also really solidifying that field goal kicking kind of unit this year. Where there was the whole debacle with Sanders Ahedic losing his job in week 1 to Alex Felkins. Felkins kind of holding it down the rest of the way. But I do think that Lustig is an upgrade, in terms of recruiting and also personnel. Like, this is a guy who was a Broyles Award nominee for nation's top assistant coach in 2018 with Syracuse, and he's done a solid job with Vanderbilt. Having coached at Syracuse and Vandy, he has ties to the East Coast, but he also has ties to the South, which is something that I think Penn State, really wants to kind of, solidify when it comes to recruiting. So I think it was a good hire.
Nationally, Seth, obviously the big story is Nick Saban retires from Alabama. Kalen DeBoer comes in from Washington. That's kind of an impact on Penn State because Kalen DeBoer is going to be on Penn State's schedule next season. Now he's not. Jed Fish is in for that Washington program. What's your big picture now of how that program fits into the Big Ten and how a team like Penn State matches up against them coming off a national title game appearance?
Yeah, I do think Alabama has just become such a powerhouse where they're always going to be competitive. And I think Kalen DeBoer is, one of the best coaches in the entire country. I think it was a good hire, but he wouldn't have been my first choice. Honestly, like this is, I thought that the pool was small and Kalen was obviously on it, but to not be able to kind of bring in a Steve Sarkisian or Dan Lanning, who has coached in the SEC and been successful in the SEC, it's a bit questionable. Like, this is new. This is going to be very new. is going to be a new look Crimson Tide, and we'll see what the fallout continues to look like in terms of, coaches coming and going and transfers. But it definitely shakes things up on the national stage. With Penn State, now trying to win a national championship or at the very least make a 12-team playoff. This is a team that's, going to be competing as well. And who knows, maybe we'll see a Penn State-Alabama matchup one of these years.
Thoughts on Washington and where they go from here?
Yeah, Washington, I mean, getting Jedd Fisch, probably the next – it's interesting when you kind of see the carousel come to life, right? When one coach goes to the next and then one guy moves up. Fisch did a great job at Arizona, which is a team that, had struggled in past years and really made that, a pretty dominant program this past season, which is it's hard to do down there. I think that it's a good fit. DeBoer was able to make it work coming over from Fresno State. So if he was able to do that, I think Fisch, probably has more background having done it, at a bigger school, Arizona. But to lose, not just DeBoer, but also Ryan Grubb, your offensive mind, and then your generational quarterback and Michael Penix, it's not easy. But I do think that Jedd Fisch was a good hire, and I'm interested to see what they're able to do.
I think an interesting angle to this is that there's been a couple Tom Allen connections, right, to what's going on at Alabama. You obviously have Kalen DeBoer was ran Tom Allen's offense for a year. Kane Womack appears to be the choice as defensive coordinator. Does that matter if you're Penn State? Does that kind of show how well regarded a guy like Tom Allen is and why he was a nice get for Penn State at defensive coordinator?
It's definitely cool to see it kind of play out where, I think maybe Tom Allen's best trait of all was the fact that he was able to kind of recruit some great coaches and make some, pretty substantial hires that have, definitely paid off. And we're continuing to see them climb in the coaching world. I don't think anyone really knew who Kalen DeBoer was when it came to 2019 or 2020. And right after those, pretty successful years, DeBoer finds some success at Washington. And Fresno State. He really hasn't lost as a head coach. And then Kane Womack as well, which is, he's a guy that I think a lot of people look at and they say, well, can Tom Allen even coach defense, without Womack? Because this was a guy who came in after Tom Allen had been coaching, defense primarily while also serving as head coach. And he stepped back a little to let Kane handle the business. And when Kane left, Tom Allen took back over and, Indiana's defense started to show some struggles. So, great defensive mind, but I really do think the question there is, can Tom Allen go back to successfully coaching, with an eye on the defense?
Seth, want to get into a couple other big storylines. Number one, I think, is how many guys Michigan has lost to the NFL draft. J.J. McCarthy, Blake Corum, Roman Wilson, just to name a few. Do you see that as a possible leading indicator of Jim Harbaugh's intentions? I know we saw he interviewed with, I think, at least the Chargers. I haven't seen anything else yet, but do you look at the way those guys are kind of saying we're moving on rather than come back to try to go back to back as a possible leading indicator that Michigan is going to be going through a period of rebuilding here?
Yeah, I think definitely. Next year is going to be interesting for a number of reasons, but Michigan, which has been far and away, most dominant team in the Big Ten for the last 3 seasons, is going to look very, very different. Not having Jim Harbaugh, I know they didn't have him for 8 games this year, but to not have him as their head coach at all is significant if it happens. And obviously J.J. McCarthy also declaring for the draft. Blake Corum's gone. Roman Wilson's gone. Like, that was their offensive core. I think Donovan Edwards is the only one who's really announced that he's returning. But I do think it's pretty obvious that if Harbaugh goes, it's probably going to be Sharon Moore as the next head coach. And, that was a guy who, coached against Penn State this year when Harbaugh was suspended. And he's shown that he's able to do some things. whether it's on offense or whether it's in recruiting. I think that, he's probably the guy to hold down that fort, but Michigan is Michigan. It's hard to see them not really having success, especially after, riding the coattails of a national championship. But, changes come and changes go in college football. So we'll have to see what happens with that Wolverine program.
Yeah, we'll have to see whether it's a plus or minus that Penn State does not have Michigan on the schedule this year. Right. It could be if they bounce back well, you might, as Penn State, you might say that's good that Penn State doesn't have to play them, gets to play other Big Ten teams. Or you might say that was an opportunity for a bigger win that maybe Penn State doesn't get because of the conference realignment, where now you're not facing Michigan and Ohio State every single season. It's something we're gonna have to look at this time next year to know for sure whether it was a good thing or a bad thing. But for now, I think it's just interesting to watch from afar. Seth, any reaction to Sean Clifford getting into an NFL playoff game before Kenny Pickett did?
Yeah, that was wild. I don't think anyone would have predicted that last time, Penn State and Pitt played. But props to Sean Clifford. Like, that is a good job. Being a backup quarterback in the NFL is great, but to do it with the Green Bay Packers, who are now, one of the more fun teams in the NFL, it's good, and I'm happy for him. I really am. Sean is a good guy. He worked his butt off at Penn State, and there were ups and downs, but he made a football career out of it, even when I don't think a lot of people thought that he was going to. And to see him kind of play in the playoffs there, it was pretty exciting. There have been a number of some other Penn State players in the playoffs this year, but Sean Clifford's a guy I don't think a lot of people were expecting to see play at that level. Especially after watching him over the past couple of years.
Yeah, I think it's good for the program that the Trace McSorley was able to find. He's made something of a career. He's never started for any long periods of time or anything like that, but he's been able to bounce around the league, cash some checks for several years at this point, and I think you have to have the same hope for Sean Clifford, and I think that matters if you're Penn State, because they don't have that kind of history of guys, at least at the position. Obviously, you have Michael Robinson kind of move around, right? And he made quite a nice career for himself
as a fullback.
Yeah, but it wasn't as it wasn't as a quarterback. So I think it's important to show recruits that you can come to Penn State and you can get a job in the NFL and kind of you'll get your chance. And that's more than I think you could have said about Penn State for a lot of the end of that Paterno era between Morelli and Rob Bolden and those guys who got starting reps. I think it's a good sign for Penn State that they're getting guys into the league and have something to point to with recruits. Other programs may have more, but at least Penn State has more than it has, at least in its recent history. Seth, I'll get you out of here on this. Basketball team gets smoked inside by Purdue, just nothing for them. It seems like they're gonna match up decently with teams that can't obliterate them inside. But when you face a Zach Edey in Purdue, they just don't have. It seems like they just are not going to have a lot of hope for the rest of the season.
Yeah, that probably goes for most teams in the country. But this was the same problem we saw last year too, where it was Keba Jai who was getting kind of worked in the paint, and then this year, you think that things might improve with Qudus Wahab, who's a pretty defined and experienced center, but it really hasn't. And outside of him, I think there's just kind of a lack of talent in that front court. The guards, as we've seen, are capable. Kanye Clary's been pretty outstanding this year. Ace Baldwin Jr. probably could win Defensive Player of the Year in the Big Ten. I think he's he has 13 steals over the past 2 games. He had 8 steals in one game against Northwestern. But those centers are just not getting it done. I think having Favor Aire back, after that long injury helps. But you got to think about it like this. This is an inexperienced basketball player as it is. He's only been playing for a few years. He only played in a couple games in Miami last year. For him to miss, 8 weeks and then come back, and now he's just in the bulk of Big Ten play. And one of his first matchups is Zach Edey. That's hard to do. And Meech Lilly, also kind of just trying to figure it out. But if Penn State wants to find success down the road, got to figure it out in the post. They really got to figure it out, and it just has not been pretty there the past couple weeks.
Yeah, I think it's just going to be hard to, it's going to be hard to shoot your way out of that problem the way you did last season, right? And that's what Penn State had the luxury of, was just kind of just generational shooters all around that could, when they were on, it didn't matter what kind of defense you were playing in the post. You could outscore teams. You could, beat them that way. They don't have those guys this year. That's no slight on Ace Baldwin, Kanye Clary. They're playing well. I think they're good players. It's just they can't, the two of them can't make up for those shortcomings the same way a Jalen Pickett did. And that's no fault of their own, but that's the program building that Mike Rhodes is going to have to do. Seth, any final thoughts on Penn State topics this week before we sign off? Kind of, we're going to have these podcasts be a little more slimmed down, I think, in the absence of any, super meaty topics between now and spring ball.
No, I think we covered it for now. We'll see if there's some more transfer additions. I don't know how soon they'd probably bring people in now that the semester started. Like, this was their bulk that they wanted to get in now. But we'll see what happens. They're always kind of moving pieces, and there's definitely going to be, some personnel shifts, maybe with analysts and grad assistants, not as, big news, but the things are shifting in college football, and things are shifting in State College. So we'll have it all covered.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how spring ball impacts. Maybe there are a couple more guys that don't find themselves in the roles that they won in other programs, and maybe you find a couple of guys. I think, again, we go back to the Dante Cephas thing. I don't know if you want to pick guys up so late in the calendar, or at least pick up guys that you're planning to rely on, once we get into like May. But still, hopefully you can find a contributor or two if that person doesn't find the role they want in their current program. But Seth, thanks for joining me today. We'll be back next week if there's news, and look forward to talking to you then.
Awesome. Take care, Adam.
Take care, everyone. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.